Hello, everyone. Let's talk about the Middle Ages. I know every one of you, when you think of the Middle Ages or the medieval ages, something comes to mind. Like maybe everybody always says, um, "Oh, that restaurant where you go and eat and watch things." Medieval times, they call it. But in all honesty, the medieval ages, we don't really call it that. It's really not a correct term. The correct term will be the Middle Ages. Medieval was kind of what the Renaissance people called it. They didn't think anything had happened um, since the onset of Christianity through the Renaissance. They also called it the Dark Ages. So we try to even that out. We call it the Middle Ages. Here we have a gargoyle on top of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Notre Dame du Paris, it was called. Gargoyle, Gargoyles are protectors. They're there to keep evil away. You can see the Eiffel Tower in the background. Gargoyles are protectors. Sometimes they're even water spouts. Middle Ages are traditionally set between the third and fifth century. Sometimes you'll see people say the second and fifth. They're set from the third to fifth to the 14th to 15th. The dates are arbitrary, and you'll see them change from different books. It's actually the time between the Roman adoption of Christianity and the Renaissance. The Renaissance is going to change the name of things. The Middle Ages blend three traditions: the classical, Greeks and Romans, the Christian, and the Germanic. Here's kind of what a lot of people think of when they think of the Middle Ages: kings and queens at court, things like that. Of course, most people live like this, and there probably weren't houses like that at this time. This looks very late to me. This almost looks like 18th century, to be honest. Most people lived in mud huts. This is the oldest door, I believe, in Europe. And that this actually has like a cement floor that would have been dirt. It's how people lived in one room. But even before we had settled cities, well, I guess at the same time, we had Germanic tribes, and they're migratory tribes that come from the east, and they'll form about 600 nations. They're very, very interesting. And a lot of these are what you play in your games, in your computer games. With the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Vandals, where we get our word vandalism, the Franks, the Burgundians, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes. There's many of them. We can't list them all here. This Roman the Barbarians is a very interesting book. I actually own that book. It's huge. Probably weighs 10 pounds, maybe 12. Um, the Goths are, these tribes are interesting. At one point, the Goths will be on one side of the river in Italy, and the Italians on the other, the Romans on the other, and they'll fight, but sometimes they'll be friends because sometimes the Romans will want them to help them fight someone else. At other times, they'll fight each other. And the official end of Rome, as we know it, will come to an end in 476 by the Goths, who will take the entire Italian peninsula. And this is just a more modern version of how it would have looked, how they think it would have looked with people falling off and things like that. This is how things looked, the invasions of the Roman Empire. And they would fight. You can see the Goths, the Ostrogoths. You see the Visigoths are in here, the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. The blue ones are the Vandals. The greens are the Huns. The Huns are part of it until the Huns were one of these, which much later. The Vandals at Carthage. The Franks, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Jutes are going to be all around England. Very, very, very interesting. You could study these for the rest of your life. There's so much to think about. These Germanic peoples were great cavalry warriors. They had stirrups and spurs, which they got from China. They were migratory. They were a pre-urban village, and they were essentially primitive. Primitive is a rough word. They they they're different from the Romans, and the Romans knew that. Where the Romans would use olive oil and drink wine, the Goths would use butter and drink beer. Things like that. And there's Romans who would write a poem, and they would talk about the smell of a Goth and things like that. It's very funny. You can read it. There's a lot of writing about these. The German law, the collection of customs passed from generation to generation. They had tribal chiefs. They had general assemblies, which means they were fully armed warrior clans. And they would dress up in their best and they would sit around and discuss what is right and what is wrong. They influence our development of law, especially common law. The word things, i.e., thing exists in all the Germanic language and has been understood as a gathering in a certain place at a certain time. That's what they're doing here. They're going to come together and decide what they're going to do if someone does something that they need to think about. It was a tribal law and it was kind of interesting. They took the majority. It wasn't nice towards women in any way. A woman could be stripped and had her hair cut and left alone in a forest, and they would just leave her there if she did anything wrong. It was a bit brutal, but it really does influence our common law. Some of the interesting things we know about Germanic lies when we find their burials. And this is a place in England called Sutton Hoo. And this thing right here is where we found a ship that they had buried. There's a fake one now there. The ship actually was wood, so it disintegrated, but it left imprints on what it would have looked like. Let's see. Guess we'll get back to that. Don't I have that in here? Well, that's crazy. Let me show you. Hold on a second. I don't know. I think it's going. That was crazy. But here is the burial right here. Stop share. Share again. Here's the burial right here. So you can see how it would have looked. Okay. So they made a fake one for there. There is a body in there, shadows in the sand, things like that. See if they have anything else here. But it was very cool. And then here's how we think it would look now. Here's how we think it would have looked. That this important person, maybe a chief, whatever, would have been buried in his ship with all of his stuff. And we have that stuff. It's located in the British Museum. Well, that's the Thunderbolts. That's not it. And some of the stuff that they found, which I'll show you. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Okay. So one of the things, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Did you just share or something? I can't find my PowerPoint. Here we go. Down here. I hate that happens, don't you? Let's see. We'll stop share. Share again. Okay. And this is the purse lid. So this person would have had this tied around his waist. And it's pretty cool. And there's a closer look that if you can get it, you can see it. I'm not going to do it now because it takes too much time. There's all these images of a man between two animals, which we've seen in the beginning in Mesopotamia. We talked about the harp with the Gilgamesh images. We've seen this again in Egypt in the pre-dynastic cave painting. And now we're seeing it here. Here we have a bird, looks like it's feasting on another bird. And then we had this abstract non-representational design here, which I'll show you some things. All of these are in the British Museum. You can see this here, and I'll show you some other stuff. There's some coins. There's that purse lid. Other things that I have close-ups of. Here's the how it looks without the glass in front of it, of the birds and things. And that's called cloisonne, where they take this gold and they mold it, and then they put molten colored glass between thin metal strips secured to a metal surface or any object ornamented in this manner. And it also has some millefiori in it. And that's glass work, which produces distinctive decorative patterns. You can see right here on glassware. Millefiori is a combination of Italian milli and fiori, flowers. Let me show you some back. Here's that. Here's the millefiori with the blue and white. And then this is the cloisonne. Okay. And I already told you about that. We've already seen that, just to remind you. Here's some pins that they found. This animal style or zoomorphic, animal shaped, having the form of an animal, emphasis on animals. And we're going to see that for quite a while now, with the animals included in everything. Some coins. And these would go on their shoulders, and this thing would go in between the material because they didn't have buttons or zippers. They just put the tunic on and then they would attach it. And these are beautiful. You can see the millefiori, and this we've seen before. We saw in Greek. I can't even remember what it's called, but it's the gold balls that are metal together, molded together. Here's the other side. There, his mask and some of the swords and stuff, the weapons. Excuse me. Here's how it was found. Here's how it would have looked if it was cleaned up, when it was cleaned up. Sword, look, even the handle on the sword was like that. And that's how he would have looked with all of it together, just sparkling and dandy, isn't he? Oh, see, I already had that on there, and I just went crazy looking for it. And I look at this old car back here. It's so cool. They're all in their suits digging this up and looking quite long, quite big. It's a great find. And now they have a fake one out there kind of showing us about it, what it would have looked like. Very interesting. Here's what guys look like when they want to pretend they're reenacting something from the Germanic tribes. This is a fibula. It's something else that would have attached on the tunic to hold like a belt or something. The same kind of style with the gold and the cloisonne. And what I like about this is that these were Germanic tribes. They didn't have a permanent place to live. They didn't have a city to stay in. They traveled. They still created art because humans always have. They just create small art and they carry it with them, but they still have to have this beautiful stuff. Here's some of their, you know, and some of their weapons. And who is this? Is that Attila of the Hun? I think it is. So art of the early art of the Middle Ages is a fusion of Germanic and late Roman traditions, as well as early Christian and Byzantine, because they really do start to invade all over. And it's definitely not always peaceful, as you know from some of your games. Sometimes they do make peace with people. Eventually, they all sort of assimilate, as we know it had to.